James had always believed in hard work. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, but he was proud of his job at the Grand Crest Hotel. Every morning, he woke up early, ironed his uniform, and left for work with a smile. The hotel was a place of luxury, tall glass doors, marble floors, and important guests who expected nothing but perfection. James was just a hotel worker, but he treated his job with respect. He cleaned tables, carried trays, and helped guests with whatever they needed. That afternoon, the hotel lobby was busy as usual. The soft sound of classical music played in the background, and the smell of freshly baked bread filled the air from the restaurant. Guests walked in and out, talking on their phones or chatting with their families. Waiters moved around quickly, serving food to well-dressed customers sitting at tables. Everything was normal, until James heard the sound that changed everything. It was a small cough at first. Then, a woman's voice rose in panic. James turned his head toward the noise and saw a young mother sitting at a table with her baby boy. Her eyes were wide with fear. The baby, who had been happily eating moments ago, was now silent. His tiny hands were shaking. His face was turning red. James felt a chill run down his spine. The baby was choking. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The guests froze, staring in shock. A waiter nearby held a tray in his hands, unsure of what to do. The mother's voice trembled as she tried to help her child, but she looked lost and scared. The baby's body jerked, struggling for air. James didn't think. He just ran. He pushed past the guests, ignoring the surprised looks on their faces. His heart pounded in his chest as he reached the table. The mother looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "Help, please, help my baby," she cried. James nodded quickly. He had no medical training, but he had seen something like this before. He had read about it. He knew what needed to be done. Carefully, he took the baby into his arms, his hand steady despite the fear in his heart. The baby's eyes were wide with panic, his tiny mouth open, but no sound coming out. There was no time to waste. James turned the baby over, holding him against his arm. He gently but firmly patted the baby's back, hoping to clear whatever was blocking his throat. Nothing happened. The mother sobbed, her hands shaking. The guests whispered in worry. The hotel staff stood frozen, unsure whether they should interfere. James didn't stop. He adjusted his grip, slightly increasing the force of his pats, trying again. "Come on, baby, breathe," he thought desperately. Seconds felt like hours. Sweat formed on James's forehead. The room was silent, everyone watching, waiting. And then, it happened. A small piece of food shot out of the baby's mouth and landed on the table. The baby let out a loud, sharp cry, his little body shaking. The mother gasped in relief, grabbing her child and holding him close. Tears streamed down her face as she hugged her baby, whispering thanks. The baby's color slowly returned to normal, his breathing steady once again. The guests, who had been silent moments ago, suddenly erupted into cheers and applause. A few people clapped, and soon the whole restaurant was filled with the sound of hands coming together in appreciation. Someone even whistled. The mother turned to James, her voice filled with gratitude. "You saved him. You saved my baby." James let out a deep breath, realizing how fast his heart was beating. He smiled awkwardly, feeling shy under all the attention. "I just did what I could," he said softly. But before he could say anything else, a loud voice cut through the applause. "What is going on here?" The room fell silent once again. James turned around and saw the last person he wanted to see, Mr. Grant, the hotel manager. He stood tall in his expensive black suit, his arms crossed, his expression cold. His sharp eyes scanned the room before landing on James. "Why is there so much noise in my hotel?" Mr. Grant asked, his voice filled with irritation. James swallowed hard. He had just saved a baby's life. The guests were happy. The mother was grateful. But as he looked at the anger on his boss's face, A terrible feeling settled in his stomach. Something was wrong. And deep down, James already knew this wasn't going to end well for him. The applause slowly faded as Mr. Grant's sharp gaze scanned the room. His face was stone cold, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't look impressed. He didn't look concerned. He looked annoyed. James felt his stomach tighten. He had worked at the hotel long enough to know that Mr. Grant was not a man who cared about emotions. He cared about rules, discipline, and reputation. And right now, all he saw was chaos in his perfect hotel. The mother, still holding her baby tightly, looked up with red, teary eyes. "This young man saved my son's life," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "If he hadn't acted, my baby could have." She choked on her words, unable to say the horrible truth out loud. James glanced around the room. The guests were still watching, some whispering to each other. The waiters stood frozen, their eyes darting between James and the manager. No one dared to say a word. Mr. Grant slowly stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He stopped in front of James and looked him up and down. "What exactly do you think you were doing?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. James blinked in confusion. I was helping," he said carefully. "The baby was choking. I couldn't just stand there." Mr. Grant exhaled through his nose, clearly unimpressed. "And did you consider, for even a second, the disturbance you caused?" James felt a jolt of disbelief. "Disturbance?" he repeated. "Sir, the baby couldn't breathe. If I hadn't stepped in." Mr. Grant raised a hand, cutting him off. "Enough," he said sharply. "You interrupted the dining experience of our guests. You caused unnecessary panic. This hotel is a place of luxury, not a circus." James couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had just saved a child, and instead of being thanked, he was being scolded. His hands curled into fists, but he forced himself to stay calm. "With all due respect, sir," he said slowly, "I did what any decent human being would do. I couldn't just ignore it." The guests around them murmured in agreement. A few nodded. The mother wiped her tears and took a step forward. "This young man is a hero," she said firmly, "and you should be proud to have him working here." Mr. Grant's jaw tightened. He didn't like being challenged, especially not in front of guests. He looked at James for a long moment, then let out a slow sigh. "We will discuss this in my office." Now, James felt a cold dread settle in his chest. He had a bad feeling about this, but he had no choice. With one last look at the mother and her baby, he turned and followed Mr. Grant toward the back office. As he walked past the guests, he could still hear them whispering. Some looked at him with admiration. Others looked at Mr. Grant with disapproval. But none of that mattered now. James knew one thing for sure. He was in trouble. James followed Mr. Grant down the quiet hallway, his heart pounding. His legs felt heavy with each step, as if he were walking toward his own execution. The grand lobby and restaurant noise faded behind him, replaced by the sharp clicking of Mr. Grant's polished shoes on the marble floor. James kept his head up, but inside, he was shaking. Mr. Grant pushed open the door to his office and stepped inside without a word. James hesitated for a second, then followed. The office was large, neat, and intimidating. A dark wooden desk sat in the middle, spotless and organized. Expensive paintings hung on the walls, and a faint scent of cologne filled the air. It was the office of a man who controlled everything. And right now, James was standing in front of that man, waiting for his fate. Mr. Grant sat down in his leather chair and leaned back, folding his hands together. His eyes were cold as he stared at James. "Do you understand what you've done?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. James swallowed hard. "Sir, I saved a baby's life," he said. Mr. Grant exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You caused a scene. You disrupted the guests. Do you know how that makes us look?" James couldn't believe what he was hearing. I didn't think about how it looked, sir. I just acted. The baby was choking. Would you rather I stood there and did nothing?" Mr. Grant's jaw tightened. There were other staff members who could have handled it. It was not your place to interfere. James clenched his fists. No one else did anything. They froze. I couldn't wait. I had to help. Mr. Grant leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. And what if something had gone wrong? What if you had hurt the child? Do you have medical training? James hesitated. No, but... Exactly. Mr. Grant cut in. You are a hotel worker, not a doctor. You took a risk, and I cannot allow reckless behavior in my hotel. James felt anger bubbling inside him. So saving a life is reckless now? He asked bitterly. If that baby had died, would you have preferred that over a disturbance in your perfect hotel? Mr. Grant's expression darkened. The air in the room felt heavier. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a calm, emotionless voice, Mr. Grant said the words that made James's blood run cold. "You're fired." The words hit James like a slap. His breath caught in his throat. "Wait. What?" he whispered, barely believing what he just heard. Mr. Grant leaned back in his chair, his face blank. "You are no longer employed here. Collect your things and leave immediately." James's hands shook. He had worked here for years, given everything to this job, and now, because he did the right thing, he was being thrown out. His vision blurred with frustration, but he refused to let himself break. He straightened his back, took a deep breath, and looked Mr. Grant straight in the eyes. "You're making a mistake," he said. Mr. Grant didn't even flinch. "That's not your decision to make. Now, get out." James clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. He turned around, opened the door, and stepped out without another word. But as he walked down the hallway, his fists tightened. He had just lost his job for doing the right thing. But something told him this wasn't the end. James stepped out of Mr. Grant's office, his mind spinning. Fired, just like that. No second chances, no gratitude, nothing. He had given years of his life to this hotel, working long shifts, always doing his best. And now, because he saved a baby's life, he was being thrown out like trash. His hand shook with frustration as he walked toward the employee locker room to collect his things. Other staff members glanced at him, their eyes filled with curiosity and pity. News spread fast in the hotel, and they had probably already heard what happened. But no one dared to say anything. They all knew how ruthless Mr. Grant could be. James opened his locker and grabbed his few belongings, a small notebook, a pen, and a worn-out wallet. That was all. He had spent more time in this hotel than at home. Yet now, it felt like he had never belonged here. As he turned to leave, he heard a soft voice behind him. "James." He turned and saw Lisa, one of the receptionists. She was one of the few staff members who had always been kind to him. Her eyes were filled with worry. "Is it true? You got fired?" James forced a small smile. "Looks like it." Lisa shook her head in disbelief. "That's not fair. You saved a child's life." James let out a dry laugh. "Apparently, that's bad for business." Lisa hesitated, then stepped closer. "Listen, the woman you helped, the baby's mother, she's been asking for you. She wanted to thank you properly." James frowned. "Where is she?" Lisa glanced around, as if making sure no one was watching, then whispered, "She's in the lobby." "But James, be careful. Mr. Grant is furious." James nodded. "I don't care anymore." With that, he turned and walked toward the lobby. His heartbeat was steady, but deep down, something told him this wasn't over yet. As soon as he stepped into the grand lobby, he spotted the woman. She was standing near the entrance, holding her baby tightly. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Oh, thank God. I was looking for you." James smiled, feeling a little warmth in his chest. "I'm glad your baby is okay." The woman's eyes filled with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't stepped in. She shuddered at the thought, hugging her baby closer. Then she frowned. I heard what happened. They fired you, didn't they? James sighed. Yeah, guess saving lives isn't part of my job description. The woman's expression changed. Her sadness turned into something else, something fierce. That's ridiculous. You shouldn't be punished for doing the right thing. James shrugged. Mr. Grant doesn't care. To him, I'm just an employee who broke the rules. The woman stared at him for a moment, then took a deep breath. James, I need to tell you something. James raised an eyebrow. What is it? She hesitated, then looked him straight in the eyes. I'm not just any guest. My name is Olivia Carter, and I own this hotel. James froze. What? His mind struggled to process what she had just said. Olivia Carter. Why did that name sound familiar? Then it hit him. Carter Enterprises, the company that owned a chain of luxury hotels, including this one. The woman he saved wasn't just another guest. She was the owner of the entire hotel. James's heart pounded in his chest. He had just been fired, but suddenly, everything had changed. James stood frozen, his mind racing. The owner? He had spent years working at this hotel, following orders, fearing Mr. Grant's authority, only to find out that the woman he had saved was the real boss. It felt unreal. He stared at Olivia, trying to make sense of everything. You own this hotel? He finally asked, his voice quieter than before. Olivia nodded, shifting her baby in her arms. Yes, my father started Carter Enterprises, and after he passed, I took over. I don't usually make unannounced visits, but today I wanted to experience the hotel as a regular guest. She sighed, shaking her head. I never expected something like this to happen. James could hardly believe it. Mr. Grant had fired him without even realizing that the woman involved was his own boss. He felt a strange mix of frustration and amusement, but mostly he felt something new, hope. Olivia's eyes darkened with anger. The way Mr. Grant handled this situation was unacceptable. He punished you for saving my son's life. She turned slightly, scanning the lobby. Where is he now? James hesitated, but before he could answer, a familiar voice cut through the air. Excuse me, ma'am. Can I help you with anything? James turned around to see Mr. Grant walking toward them, his usual confident posture in place. His expression was polite, his tone smooth, but he had no idea who he was speaking to. Olivia straightened her back and lifted her chin. Yes, you can, Mr. Grant. The manager blinked in surprise. You know my name. Olivia gave a tight smile. I should. I'm Olivia Carter. Mr. Grant's confident expression shattered instantly. His mouth fell open slightly, his eyes widening. He looked at James, then back at Olivia, as if trying to make sense of what was happening. Ms. Carter, bye. I didn't realize. Olivia didn't give him a chance to recover. You fired this man for saving my child's life, she said, her voice sharp. Tell me, Mr. Grant, is that how you run my hotel? The color drained from Mr. Grant's face. He swallowed hard. I didn't know he was helping you. And that makes a difference. Olivia interrupted. Would you have fired him if I were just another guest? Or is this how you always treat your staff? Mr. Grant opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was trapped. He had fired James in front of dozens of guests. There was no excuse that could save him now. Olivia took a deep breath. I don't tolerate leaders who put business above basic human decency. She glanced at James before turning back to Mr. Grant. Consider this your last day as manager. James's eyes widened. She was firing him. Mr. Grant's entire body stiffened. Miss Carter, please. No, Olivia cut him off. I don't want excuses. I want results. And right now, I want you out of my hotel. The entire lobby had gone silent. Guests and staff members were watching, stunned. Mr. Grant, who had always been the most powerful man in the hotel, now stood completely powerless. After a few tense seconds, he finally lowered his head. Without another word, he turned and walked away. James watched as the man who had fired him disappeared through the staff hallway. He felt a strange sense of satisfaction, but more than that, relief. Then, Olivia turned back to him. "James, I owe you an apology. You should never have been treated this way." James shook his head. "You don't have to apologize. I was just doing what anyone would have done." Olivia smiled. "Maybe, but not everyone has the courage to act." She shifted her baby in her arms and took a step closer. "I don't just want to fix this mistake, James. I want to make things right." She paused, then said something that made James's heart skip a beat. "How would you like to be the new hotel manager?" James felt his breath catch in his throat. Did she just say, hotel manager? His mind raced, trying to process her words. For years, he had worked under Mr. Grant, following orders, doing his best, yet never imagining he could ever reach a position like that. And now, in the span of a single day, he had lost his job, only to be offered the highest position he could dream of. "Me, manager," James finally managed to say, still in shock. Olivia nodded, her expression warm but firm. "Yes, I need someone in charge who values people over profits, who knows what it means to care. You proved today that you're that kind of person." James hesitated. It felt too good to be true. "But I have no experience as a manager. I don't know if I can do it." Olivia smiled. "You didn't have experience saving lives either, but that didn't stop you, did it?" James stared at her, feeling a strange warmth spread through his chest. She was right. He had never been a hero before, but when the moment came, he didn't hesitate. He did what was right. Maybe that was all leadership really was. The entire lobby was still watching. The same guests who had seen him get fired were now witnessing something completely different. His rise. Lisa, the receptionist, stood among them, eyes wide with excitement. Other employees exchanged glances, stunned but hopeful. They had all worked under Mr. Grant's rule, and now they were seeing something new. James took a deep breath. His heart was still pounding, but this time it wasn't fear, it was excitement. "If you really think I can do this, then yes. I'd be honored to take the job." A smile spread across Olivia's face. Then it settled. She glanced at the staff gathered around. "Everyone, meet your new hotel manager." A wave of murmurs passed through the crowd, followed by soft claps. Then Lisa started clapping louder, and soon others joined in. The quiet lobby was now filled with applause, not just from employees, but from the guests who had seen everything unfold. James felt a lump in his throat. Just an hour ago, he had been humiliated and thrown out. Now he was standing taller than ever. Mr. Grant was gone. The hotel had a new leader. And James. His journey was just beginning. James stood in the middle of the Grand Hotel lobby, still trying to believe what had just happened. Just a short while ago, he had been fired, humiliated, and left wondering what he would do next. Now he was the manager of the very place that had once cast him aside. The applause around him had faded, and staff members were already whispering among themselves, excitement buzzing in the air. Lisa rushed over, her eyes shining with happiness. "James, I can't believe this. You totally deserve it," she said, giving him a quick hug. James chuckled, still feeling a little overwhelmed. "Honestly, I can't believe it either." Olivia adjusted her baby in her arms and turned to face him again. "James, I know this is a lot to take in, but I have no doubt that you'll do a great job." She handed him a sleek black keycard. "This is your office now. Take some time to get settled. And don't worry, I'll have someone guide you through everything you need to know." James took the card carefully, staring at it. Just this morning, he had been another employee in the background. Now he had his own office. Olivia gave him a reassuring smile. "I'll be back in a few days to check in, but I trust you completely." You earned this." With that, she turned and walked toward the entrance, where a car was already waiting for her. As she stepped outside, she looked back one last time, giving him a final nod of approval before disappearing into the city. James exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. This was real. This was happening. He glanced around and saw the staff watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. Some looked hopeful, others nervous, but one thing was clear: they were ready for change. Straightening his shoulders, James took a deep breath and stepped forward. "All right, everyone, let's get to work." A new chapter had begun, not just for James, but for the entire hotel.